Produced by Ranting Rhino Productions, Praxis Pedagogy exists to position our teaching and learning practice within different methodologies. We want to construct a guild of educators dedicated to designing a difference in our own teaching and learning and in our students' experience. Hey, welcome back to Praxis Pedagogy Podcast. So glad you tuned into episode 80. In this episode, we have Edna Golandsky. Now, Edna Golandsky is a world-renowned piano pedagogue and the leading exponent of the Taubman approach. She has earned wide acclaim throughout the United States and abroad for her pedagogical expertise, her extraordinary ability to solve technical problems, and for her penetrating musical insight. Edna started piano study in Israel at the age of 8. A gifted pianist, she played recitals at the age of 10 and was performing with orchestras by the age of 12. Edna came to the United States when she was 16 years old. Get that, she was 16 years old. She came to the United States and was immediately accepted to the Juilliard School of Music. And for the next 8 years, studied there, graduating with bachelor and master's degree in piano performance. You're really going to enjoy this episode. I had a great time talking with Edna. It was an honor and a pleasure to have her on the show. Three, two, one. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Praxis Pedagogy Podcast. So glad you've taken the time to listen into today's episode 80. I have a very special guest on the podcast today. Her name is Edna Golandsky. And Edna, it is my honor and pleasure to have you here today. And I am really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to your questions and sharing ideas and information, and I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, good. Well, this is going to be awesome. So, Edna, why don't you share with us a little bit of your background, specifically where you were born, and how that played into your introduction into the music world?
I was born in Jerusalem, Israel, and at age 3, we moved to Haifa, which is a town on the Mediterranean. So I'm a sea lover, water lover from then on. I don't know if it had anything to do with what happened later on. I mean, Israel was a young country, many Holocaust survivors. My family lost, I had no aunt and uncles, no grandparents. And that was the normal. But my mother came from Poland, and education was very important. Life was very limited in terms of what the Jews could do and what kind of professions they could practice. But the father made sure that they went to the good schools, wherever they could be accepted, and that my mother learned the violin, and that somehow there was a love of music, or just the idea that music should be part of your life. My parents didn't have much money, but the next building, there was a piano teacher. So I started taking lessons, and I was what people would say, well, quite old at age 8. So that was, and yeah, so that was my, that's how I started. And I really just did it. It wasn't like, you asked about when did you realize that you love music? I don't think it was a love. I think I was just told to do it. And I didn't have a piano. I practiced at the piano teacher. She was also, came from Poland. And I practiced there. And apparently I learned very quickly. I had no way to measure or to think about it. But within a year, I was playing already, I guess, intermediate pieces and playing fast. And she decided to pass me on to her teacher, who had the education, in Moscow, had conservatory education. And I studied with her until I came to this country. And she really, I had to go twice a week. I had to take a bus and then walk. It wasn't, close by. And I think she instilled a lot in me. She was a wonderful teacher, in terms of very, very musical, very devoted. And within a year, she put me on stage and I gave a recital at age 10. And then at 12, I was playing with an orchestra. So those things kind of happen. Um, and I listened to music because radio was on in those years. We still listen to the radio. And I responded. I remember listening to Tchaikovsky concerto and Rachmaninoff, and especially the romantics, and I loved it. I mean, I felt emotional connection. And then at age 16, I had an uncle who was a Holocaust survivor who came to the US, married and had a family at that point. And my father, his brother, had died in in Israel when I was a baby, and he, knowing that I was gifted, he and his wife suggested that I come and study in the US. So I was put on a boat and and came to the US, not speaking the language, and somehow I was put in high school. I learned within a few months. I was speaking fairly well. And I didn't know anything about Juilliard. I didn't know exactly where, but they said, we'll send her to the best school. They really wanted me to come. And I started going to the prep division once a week. I was going to high school. And I really enjoyed it. And I had a wonderful teacher, also very devoted, Jane Carlson. And at one point, she brought me to Rosina Levine, who was like the big teacher at Juilliard, and she accepted me for the next year. I still had to take the exam, the entrance exam to the college level, and I worked with her. But she was very, very old, and I was not getting very much. And my roommate said that her teacher, Adele Marcos, really was interested in me, so I started working with her, and I did it through my master's degree. So I would say that my years at Juilliard really opened my eyes. I was exposed to a world of music that I didn't know before. Yeah, I was going to concerts. The school had a wonderful orchestra, wonderful dance department. I mean, it was just a whole world opened up. And I would say that that's when I really realized how much I love music. I really needed that kind of infusion. uh, I was not a huge practicer, but things came easily enough. Um, so that was, were the early years. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you moved from Europe to the States, did you come by yourself, or did your parents come with you, or were you just put on a boat and you knew you were going to end up in the US, and
In
you were
Brooklyn.
12?
No, I was 16.
Oh, 16. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
16. I mean, 16, I'm mercy.
Crazy. Yeah. Crazy. Yeah, it was, my family was involved. My uncle was a sea captain. And so I was like put in hands, like you put a child on an airplane and there's someone who takes care of the child. And I had a wonderful time, doing it. I mean, being a teenager on a boat, Um, and, we had connections it was not like owning ships or anything, it was all government owned. But my father also worked for, it was in relation, my adoptive father. Um, so yeah, so I was put on a boat, and 2 weeks later, I mean, we stopped in Europe. Israel is in the Middle East, so I came from the Middle East. Through some of the ports in Europe, I saw a little bit of the world, and I ended up, yeah, it was a shock. The first year was very difficult. I almost gave up. I was very homesick, and I didn't speak the language, and I had to go to school, and learn everything. But by the end of that year, I went home. My mother said, "Don't go back," but I decided at that point that I was ready to go back.
That must have been a hard decision to go back if your mom's saying don't go back, and you have this year alone. We're not alone, but away from immediate family, and you've done so much growth and you've learned so much. That must
No,
have been a hard decision.
no, because no, she said that because that year I really suffered. I cried a lot. That was the reason. And my family was wonderful. I had two cousins also. So they were wonderful. I mean, it was as good as it could be. I didn't realize, I saw films about the United States, and it was very idealized, and how you go to school and how it looks. And, in reality is always different. But so it was only because of that. I think that having been, having lost her family, and then losing a husband to having a young baby, and still letting me go, I think was, to me, when I look back, an act of incredible love, because I think she suffered and I have two children. I could never see sending anyone at age 6. No way.
I know I know how you feel, Edna, because I have 4 myself, and my oldest daughter, who's my second oldest child, she flew in a plane I mean, she was still on the continent. She flew from here to, Iowa, and I'm following the tracking thing on the internet, and her plane got diverted a little bit because of a storm. And I'm already thinking like, okay, so is she going to make her connections? How's she going to get from here to there? She hasn't even landed yet. And I'm already thinking, I can't imagine
Can you
putting
imagine?
putting my 16-year-old daughter on a boat and saying, okay, in 2 weeks, you're going to make it across the Atlantic and you'll be in a whole new country, essentially a whole new world, right?
Right. But, it was, if I didn't want to go, I didn't know. It was offered, and my mother said, this is the opportunity. And it sounded very exciting. I mean, I can't say that anyone forced me to do it. And you will have, I think that she felt that there would be an opportunity that otherwise I wouldn't have. And my intention was to come back. But then I met Dorothy Taubman, and that changed my plans.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about Dorothy in a few minutes. But when you're 12 and you're on a stage doing like a full on orchestra situation, like you're 12, like, tell us what you were thinking. Were you thinking anything, or were you just in the moment and here we go?
Totally scary.
Okay, good to hear.
My teacher, she was really like a mother hen. I mean, she took me, she worked with me, and then, she was there like a mother. Um, yeah, I think that it wasn't one of those experiences when I read about people, and, the parents gave them violin at age 3 or 4, and they said it was it. Or a kid sitting at a piano, and they say, oh my God, this is it. Uh, no, it was kind of just something that came easily. And I had people who were kind of, I wouldn't say pushing, but kind of, yeah, putting me in those places. And I think I did have, I just don't remember how I felt in those years. I know that I loved to play, and I loved the music. I didn't love practicing, but we talk about practicing. I have a totally different view, you know. So yeah, I don't know. It's all a little bit hazy how it all happened, and somehow, and I feel extremely fortunate that it turned out this way, because I really it was a good match for me. But if I hadn't met Dorothy Taubman, I don't know if I would have stayed in music. Yeah, because I think that as much as I liked performing, but I could see the rest of my life sitting in a room. I really realized that, and practicing 5, 6, 7 hours a day. The idea that things will always improve. And I was really very, very naive, because I didn't really know anything. My education started with Dorothy Taubman. And I don't mean everything, but because I was exposed I'm very grateful for all that I got, from this school. But in terms of learning about the piano and you know, what technique is, and how you express music, it's like I started then.
Yeah.
It was my start.
It's interesting that you bring up the word technique, because in some of my research that I was doing in preparation for today's conversation, I noticed that you would use this term natural technique, specifically about yourself, that you learned how to play this natural technique or in a style that was very natural. And I've never heard that before. What does that mean?
You mean with Dorothy Taubman, or I don't remember in what relation
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah, it was in context of you being at Juilliard and they were training you, and you said, I learned a lot there, but I played in this real natural technique kind of way.
I'll explain. I had a facility, and I was always told I'm very natural. And I think I was natural, meaning that it kind of, um, it was fluid. And I could move quickly, and I could move around the piano. But in retrospect, there were many limitations. I always told that I don't need technique, and I was very lucky, because technique meant and still means to a great degree sitting and practicing exercises. And those exercises actually cause many of the problems that musicians face. So I was always left alone. You have a natural technique, you don't have to practice scales and arpeggios 2 hours a day and then go to music. It was that kind of instruction. So that's what I meant, I think, by, it looked very natural and it was very fluid, and everybody thought of me as being a very natural pianist. That's what it was. I mean, natural to today means something very different to me. But what it was then, it was how people saw it. When I played, it was fluid.
Right. So what does natural mean to you now?
A lot of people use that word. It's thrown around. This is natural and this is natural, but they're having pain. So, in other words, when people say it's natural to me, I say it's really not natural, but it's habitual. In other words, we form habits. And people go to that. I do it because it's natural. Natural to me means something that goes with ease, that it flows very easily, that there are no symptoms. But nature has to be studied. What is natural is not necessarily what we just do. Sometimes, in other words, even prodigies who have great talent and intuition very often become injured. So it's something that is very instinctual. What do I have? Just a second. I wrote some things about what is. Yeah, and it's something also, I would say, what is natural is also something that feels very pleasant. That it feels good. It feels good. It comes with ease. It feels good. That it's unhindered by limitations. That's what I would call, and again, that it's symptom free. What I learned about nature is that a lot of it is hidden from the eye and has to be learned. In other words, that nature, that you don't see how the body works. The body works in a very natural way, unless we are sick, right? But can you tell what it's doing? You can't. Can't tell. You see the outside, but you don't see how the heart works. You have specialists for that. You don't see how the kidneys work. You don't see, in other words, there's a whole system that makes the body work or not work if there's a failure. If you have a car, we don't see the inside unless you open it, right? And you look, but you have parts that work and they do things and they work. They have to work together. They have to be connected. That's what technique is. It's like a system of connections.
Interesting. Okay. This is really interesting, because it makes me want to think about how some people have this intuition or even this talent, and it's raw and uncultured, I guess, as you could say. And to use the old metaphor, like an uncut diamond, and now you're bringing in skill and technique to help that diamond shine with its natural properties without cutting too much of it away and making it fragile.
Well, so talking about prodigies or about the great talent and all of that, I think that there is such a thing as extremely gifted and extremely talented. And we can also talk about, the whole, you asked, about what's the role of talent, or is it overrated? What Let me just say something about that. When you have, when people are judged on talent very often, they're really judged of how well they play. In other words, when it's very fluid, it's called talented. So you have one side that will say, that it's all talent, and you have the other side that says it's 10,000 hours of practice, of learning. And the truth as often is somewhere in the middle. So if talking about changing my mind, or one of the many things that I've learned is, to my surprise, but of course it made total sense, is that when there are limitations and when there are technical problems, talent can't come through very often. I've had students who came, who I couldn't even tell. I knew that they were proficient, I knew that they were smart, they were devoted, this was their profession, but I couldn't tell the degree of talent. Yes, because they had pain. Because I think of one case out of many. I had a young girl, a South American, and she was studying in Paris at the conservatory there, and she developed a pain in the fourth finger. She was injured, what you would call injury pain, and they tried all kinds of things, and nothing worked. And her mother is a doctor, so someone told her to get in touch with me, and I flew here, and I looked at her. Small girl, small hands, pain, not playing, all the very big pieces. And I said, look, I will get rid of the pain. I could see what it was. I'll get rid of the pain quickly, but it doesn't mean there's a great technique. You can get rid of symptoms, if it doesn't mean underneath it, there's always a great technique. Sometimes there is, that just got off the road. But what happened by the end of that year, she came maybe in September, the pain was gone in no time. But then I worked, and to use computer language, I installed, things. I could see what she wasn't doing right. I put in the right things. With the end of that year, she was playing very difficult pieces, and she was playing with such fluidity. And she was so musical, which I couldn't tell at the beginning.
Okay, that's amazing. So are you saying that the pain was holding back some of her ability to just let go and get caught up in the flow in the moment and feel the music and feel the connection?
It was not a skillful technique. She was practicing a lot, but it just wasn't a great technique. I mean, I gave her the skills to be able to handle things, and taught her also how to get sound, which is part of, it's the most basic thing in musical expression, how to physically shape phrases. So the music is shaped, how to breathe, how to work with the rhythm. I showed her how to play, actually, and she learned so fast. And I always look to see what is the natural talent, actually. In other words, what came from her, because I can direct and I can show people what to see in the music, what to bring out, and how to use the hand. The big word in this work is the how to. It's not just say, play this, very dramatically, or sing. If the person does it, that's fine. I don't touch what they can do. But if most of the time they can't. And when I show what to do, it opens up the gates to expressivity. In the case of this girl, she was actually a huge talent. And when she finished, I'm an adjunct professor at the City University here. So people come to me, and if they want to get a degree, I'm on the faculty. The end of when she finished, they said it was the best recitals that they could remember. And when she came, she would have been called a mediocre talent.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And sometimes people come and they're very, very accomplished and they don't need that much work. And I would say I have to work with them musically very, very hard. So I would say that there isn't such a natural talent for music they can develop. But so the role of talent is that the people who have a particular affinity, I would say, technically and musically very often also. And the learning goes very, very quickly. And the people who are very smart and they're gifted, and it's slower. People don't go exactly in the same pace as others. So I don't know, does that answer it? So I cannot judge. I feel that when people audition to conservatory and they're not considered to be talented, and they come and they're limited physically, they have problems. So I can't even judge talent, because I find that the more I put into them and the more I show them how to, the talent grows. And the bar grows. So I can't even tell the potential of a person. I mean, I say what this work does for you is actually you can realize your potential. But the potential grows. So it's kind of endless. I have people who've been with me for 10, 20, 30 years, Some of them are our best teachers, and they play fantastically well. And the talent grows and the ability grows. And, so we become smarter. I mean, this work really uses your head, your brain. You can't do it without thinking. There's no relearning without thinking, without going through the brain. So for me, one of the most exciting thing is that there is constant growth until the day you die. I mean, this is kind of the ideal thing, that to be able to, so I don't know.
No, that's good.
So it sounds,
no.
It's too good to be true.
No, it's actually, it's encouraging, because I look at, people that I know, or even myself, right? I would never consider myself to be that technically sound. I have some talent, but to know that there are certain things that someone can learn, and if they're willing to put some work and dedication behind it, it almost, from what I'm hearing, it's like it unlocks a door where the potential is allowed to grow and the talent is allowed to grow and get better. Because I mean, as a tradesperson, my craft and my skill gets better as I gain more experience, because I do more things. I realize, I did that wrong. So when I go to do something again, I don't repeat the mistake. Or I watch somebody else do work, and I learn that technique or a method of doing the work, and I'll apply that in my own way, in my own craft. And so, yeah, it makes total sense that when somebody comes to you and you can't really gauge their talent, it's like you can't see through that closed door. And so what you're doing is you're giving them the key to unlock the door. They open the door doing all the work, and then the talent emerges, the potential emerges, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's really, really endless. So the people who come to me, I mean, are serious people, so I know that there is a talent there. I know that there is some of them come after their doctoral programs already. Some of them come, people who change professions because they knew that, that there were too many limitations. But the love is so strong that when they discover this, they come back. And so age, by the way, it's only the desire to learn, but age is not a factor.
Oh, that's encouraging to hear too. Because I mean, I've always held a high respect for people who play the piano. I just almost become spellbound as I'm watching people play, because I'm thinking that how do you do all that work, right? And I know some of it is muscle memory, and some of it comes from practice. But to me, I like you were saying earlier, I like going and listening, and I want to feel emotionally moved by the music. Because
Yeah.
I mean, quite honestly, I couldn't tell you if somebody was really technically sound or not. I mean, other than hearing notes that probably shouldn't have been played. But when I'm emotionally moved by a piece of music, that's where it really gets me. And I mean, I listen to a wide range of music too. I mean, I grew up listening to heavy metal, but I also love classical. And I see a real connection between the two. Like there's just something about the rhythm and the syncopation and the timing that just they both have it. And I say that to people and they look at me like I'm crazy. And it's like, it's not that they're playing the same style necessarily. Like you're not going to hear heavy metal sounding like classical or classical sounding like heavy metal, but the foundation of the bones are there. And then some people just look at me like I'm crazy, but I don't know.
You're not crazy. You're not crazy at all. And there were studies, and I forget the name of the person at McGill University, Daniel, I can't remember his name, but he did a study. He was, I think, a rock musician who became a neuroscientist. He did the study 10, 15 years ago. What is it that gets people? And what gets you when you sit in an audience? And I think that it was in his opinion, it was timbre. It was that I think a lot of it is rhythm also. I think it's quality of sound. It depends. I mean, I listen to Lady Gaga and I'm very moved.
Sure.
Very
Yeah.
often,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not my kids grew up in pop music, and I used to look down, but I gave that up. It was really a mistake, and I really do love. But I'm mostly, I mostly am involved with classical music, modern music, and I work also with jazz musicians. I mean, how you play is the same no matter what. What I wanted to say, which is so complex with playing the piano, is that you have to take ideas and transfer them into sensations. And what this work does that is so incredible, that you become so sensitive to you learn what is right and what feels good, because it has to feel good. Um, and has to feel good and easy, and there is a rightness about it. And also, it's not forgotten. The right things, the right movements, the right positions, and the right movements. And we're talking about a very minute world, because when you move, you see fingers moving, but you don't see it's small motions, it's small muscles. It's not like the whole body, you know. Um, so transferring, the idea, the learning from first hearing what it is into what it feels like. It's a whole world of sensations at the piano, and it becomes a system that kind of goes back and forth. The brain teaches, the hands learn, and the hand sends a message back. That feels good. So, when you mentioned the word intuition, and I used to think that I have great intuition, when I meet somebody and I don't like them, I know because I'm very intuitive. Well, I learned I was wrong, and I was wrong, about people, like that. But I learned also that intuition, uh, the instrument is primitive. And I know that we don't think that way. And I know that it's controversial even to say it. But, what it is that the intuition really gets, in a way, like with a prodigy, there's something very intuitive, clearly, but it gets off the road very often also, because there's no knowledge to back it. When you do something that doesn't feel right, you don't know what it is, and you keep doing it, and then other things follow. But when things, it's like if you walk very awkwardly, if something doesn't feel right, where's the intuition? Is there intuition to say do this or do that? You go to a therapist, who tells you what's wrong. But through the years, I came through and actually an economist called Daniel Kahneman. I don't know, you probably never heard of him, but my son went to the University of Pennsylvania. And whenever we went for parents' weekend, we would get like the best professors giving talks. And this Professor Kahneman, I hope I pronounced his name right, was a Nobel Prize winner. Was one of the, I think he was at the university at that time. I'm not sure if he was there or he was at Princeton. But he developed a whole system of of economics. He was an economist basically, and he felt that the way economists thought, it was all math based, really was not right. And he understood also, he was also a psychologist, that he could predict, according to his research, he could predict actually what people would buy, what would make people buy, what would make people not buy. That there were certain predictable behaviors um, in economics, and people laughed at him. 30 years later, he won the Nobel Prize, and the field completely changed to be psychology based versus math based. But he said something about his book, because I just found that lecture so fascinating. All the lectures were great, but this one really got to me. And he said, our intuition is by no means an infallible guide. Our perceptions may be distorted by training and prejudice, or merely because of the limitations of our sense organs, which of course perceive but a small fraction of the world. I said, this is my friend. If he says it, that. And then I came across the writer Michael Lewis, and there was an interview with him, something in the New York Times, and he talks about trained intuition. And I love that. That intuition, what I find that when you put people on the right track, it brings in the intuition, because they can say, the intuition says, yeah, this feels good. This doesn't feel good. This feels awkward. This feels just right. So it's kind of the intuition comes, because I find it so much what this work really shows, and all the things that also evolved, that I found through the last few decades, that kind of put the work even further, was that in some way our brains are a little bit primitive. That there's certain, I also learned that people, one of the surprises to me was how similar people absorb information. So in a way, like he did in economics, that I can, even though there are many differences in because people come with different combinations of wrong and right, they come from, just different backgrounds, but how the brain works is very similar. So I can basically very often predict certain behaviors that they are going to happen. And I installed it actually into how I train teachers, because it used to take me a long time. I would do something, and then it would go to the other extreme. I edit something, go to the other extreme, and then would have to bring back. And then I would add something, and the thing before would be forgotten. So I began to see how people learn and what to expect. And it kind of began to shorten, in certain ways, the period of learning of certain, period of learning, some things that we can tell ahead of time. And also, we talk about being so different from each other, and, the prejudice and racism and all of that. But, we are built the same. Whichever way you want, to look at it, you don't have to be a progressive. You don't have to be this. We are built the same, the same muscles, the same tendons, the same connections in the brain, in the body. And that's why, there aren't so many techniques. We come from a background that says there are as many techniques as there are pianists. So are there millions and millions of techniques? There is a tremendous fear that if there is a system of playing, that we will all sound the same.
Yeah, I don't buy into that. Sorry, don't buy that.
So you know what I say? I say, when painters learn how to use brush technique and how to
Mhm.
combine colors, they don't end up playing the same
No,
painting.
no, they don't. You can give I totally buy into that because you can give somebody the same palette of colors, the same brushes, exactly the same. You will get two different paintings because there's differences in pressure, there's differences in how the paint is applied, there's differences in there's so many variables, right?
What you want to paint, it really frees the imagination. What craft does, it frees the imagination. So you can't be a great painter without having the craft or sculpture, So, but in playing, we have a whole other world. We are also different from each other. But you can. The interesting thing is that when you understand how things work, really, you have the freedom to become the individual that you are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I that's, and looping back to what you were saying before about how you are unlocking the doors for people's potential and talent to emerge. I mean, you're really just opening the door for their personality to shine through in what they're doing. Right. And it, again, that's just so beautiful, but it's powerful too.
Well, I would say that that's maybe the most moving part. I mean, first of all, to me, technique and the way the technique works, and to see that world of interconnections that produces playing, um, to me, that's an art in itself. You know, uh, it's just really, it's just amazing. When you see, I mean, my husband, he's not no longer alive, but he was a neuroscientist. I always poo-pooed, I mean, something scientific. What does it have to do with music? Um, but so I didn't really, I wasn't at all thinking that way. But he always said, you can never do any research without asking questions first. And as musicians, we don't ask questions. We are just told to practice, or something is wrong with you. It's all in your head. It's practice. Practice makes perfect is only one of the things that we told, and we practice and we practice, and 30 years later, we're still practicing and we're still not getting what we want, or worse, we get into pain. So, yeah, so the whole idea, what the craft gives us and what skills gives us is the freedom, actually, like you say, to unlock, to shine, and to be able really to do fantastic things. And that's the most moving thing with this, and it also changes your life because all those limitations also cause emotional and psychological problems. So so there comes the therapist and the psychiatrist, which there may be a place for it, but if the problem you're having those if the cause for those problems has to do with faulty technique, you're not going to solve it and tell yourself that it's psychological. First, solve those problems. And if, let's say, usually it solves the psychological problems. And if there's still problems, for sure, then a psychologist or therapist can help you. But most of those problems are really rooted in not being able be to do what you want and to do it well.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Totally agree. The whole science of learning how to learn or learning how other people learn that's something that revolutionized my own teaching practice and moved me, I think, in a really strong trajectory of, having a passion for teaching and teaching what I know and teaching what I love, to a whole new area of not only do I still love it, but I love learning how other people learn so that I can tweak how I do it to help them learn it not only easier, but so that it stays with them for a lot longer than when they leave my classroom. Right. And yeah, that's amazing. If I could roll us back just a tiny bit, how did you come to know Dorothy? Because Dorothy was an instrumental in your trajectory, and just would love to hear that story. How did you and Dorothy meet? Um and yeah, let's go from there. How did you and Dorothy meet?
Well, my roommate at Juilliard, who was also my best friend, came from a scientific home. Both parents, uh, scientists, And that's how her brain worked that way. She was good at math. She learned languages very easily, but she was limited at the piano. I mean, she was still a Juilliard. She played well, but she always stuck to Bach and Mozart. And she said that's all she was interested in. Her parents met some people who knew Dorothy, who were friends of Dorothy, and they told her parents that there is this teacher who has kind of a scientific method, which to me, hearing that was a total turn off. I mean, what does science have to do with music? We are musicians, we talk about music. But she was interested, and she started taking lessons on the side. And we had a piano in the apartment, and I began to hear, she was playing so much better. I was considered the good pianist, and she was like, the more limited one. And she was beginning to play big pieces like Liszt. I said, "You don't like Liszt? How come you're playing Liszt?" She said, "Because now I can."
Ah, uh-huh.
And then she told Dorothy she always admired my ability, so she kept telling her about it. So they kind of, Dorothy said, "Oh, you have to bring her, you have to bring her." And I didn't want to go, and I didn't want to go, and I didn't want to go. And one day she said, "Just come and observe a lesson." So I went to observe a lesson, and it was kind of a shock because I've never been at a lesson where you ask questions and they're actually very logical answers, and then you try them and they work, and then you move on to something else. So it was kind of a shock. I mean, what is this? Because we never ask questions usually. And if we do, very often the teachers say, "Well, practice more," or "That's not my problem," And I mean, there are no real answers. It's kind of, very amorphous. So it kind of looked interesting. So I took some lessons, and also I played for her. She asked me to play for her. She said, "You're very gifted." She said, "But do you have backache?" And I instantly thought this woman is a witch because
Yeah, no kidding, eh? Yeah.
backache. Because I had it from since I was 8 or 9. My mother took me to doctors. They didn't know what it was. They thought maybe one leg was too short, and blah, blah, blah. There was really nothing to do. And she explained I had certain relaxations in the end, and like the wrist was a little bit down, and there were some knuckles that looked a little bit caved in. I still managed. You see, people manage in spite of. And she explained to me that when that happens, when there are breaks in the alignment, the back muscle, you're kind of falling off the instrument, when you have those relaxations. So she said other muscles come to the help to keep you on the piano, but they're not suited for that job, but something else is holding you, which is what symptoms are, when you don't do the right thing, other muscles come kind of as a to compensate. So, and she was totally right. I mean, it wasn't solved at that moment, but it kind of was a little bit like magic. How does the woman know? What's going on? Could ask questions, get answers. It kind of seems rational, but I don't really know. It's a little bit weird. But anyway, so I took lessons, and it definitely, I became curious. So like I said, I wasn't excited right away. I mean, I ended up being her main disciple and putting this work, out. But it took me a while, and it was very hard also to be in school and having to play fast every week, a new piece, memorize, so it was difficult. So I did it for a while, and then I decided to wait until I graduated. With my master's, my teacher was sure. She said, you're continuing for the doctoral program. And it was kind of she said, "You're in." It was like, you know, there's no problem. But I realized then that this is the route. This is the road that I didn't want to continue just playing and not knowing what I was doing. I realized that I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing it, like you say, naturally, instinctively. But I saw that there were solutions to things, and I decided I really want to know it. It was like the curiosity was, this is really interesting. I really want to understand everything about it. So that's how, and then starting the next year, I became, fully immersed in. So that's how I met her, completely, completely by chance. I don't know if otherwise she had people from other universities, studying on the side, but I don't know if I would have heard about her, and my life would have taken a very different trajectory.
For sure. For sure. So how do you work with some of the world's best musicians? Like they're coming to you and they're already pretty established, and how do you approach, in essence, almost breaking down their technique to build them back up to play more freely? Because that's what I'm hearing you say when people come to you and they've got this great background and they're talented and they've got all this skill, but there's just something holding them back. And it's almost like you break them down to build them back up again. That might not be the right way to say it, but it sounds to me that's what you're doing. How do you work with somebody who's got that kind of pedigree that comes to you, and like, what do you do with them?
That's actually a very good question. People don't come in the same condition. So people, so the different, I would say, categories of people who come. The people who come and they're really destroyed. So I have to, I there's no choice. I have to start. And very often, I was just thinking today, again, I'm veering. Sometimes I say something and then I think about something. So, forgive me for jumping around. But I was thinking, actually, when people first come, they've tried everything. And they've gone to doctors and to therapists, and they did, all kinds of body things, and the injuries are still there. And they come and they're in shock, basically, that they have to start again. And I always tell them, you don't have to. I said, but I can't fix it unless I put a good foundation. And very often it doesn't take that long. So this is one, I would say, one category. And I was thinking, I don't know if it's like that, but that like there are stages of grief and the stages of people coming just so destroyed, that there is I wrote, there's a shock and there's a confusion, and but they find out that something can be helpful. They become angry, that they wasted all that time. There is a denial, there is finally acceptance, and then very often they say, something, if I hadn't been injured, I wouldn't have learned this and become better than I ever would have been. So, that happens. But let's say I have people who come and they have a performance, or they have an audition. And they have certain problems that are really in the way. I don't take the technique apart. I put in what I can see right away. And that's what takes sometimes the greatest skill, is what to touch and what not to touch. And especially in situations like that, first of all, not to touch things. I happen to know at this point what is good in the technique and what is not. I don't teach what I don't have to teach. In other words, I'll put things that will connect to what is good in what is working, and bring it back to a natural state, how the body was meant to work. But people like this, I get people who are really very, very good. And I would say, what really is it, what you want from me? Because there are no symptom, not bad symptoms. They're playing very difficult pieces. They played with orchestras. And one of and those are actually the people who come at the right time, and they say, I feel like I hit a wall. That is an intelligent person. That they don't just think, if I practice more, if I practice more, if I practice. And they said, I can have this, even though they play difficult pieces, there's certain pieces I'm still afraid to take, they would say. And I would like a better sound. And I have some passages that consistently give me trouble. I will try to put things, even if it's not 100%, that immediately ameliorate the situation. And sometimes, even though I know how much more there can be, if they're happy with it, that's fine. They will get through. So I don't have to. I do, even in my presentations, I do like problem solving in action, or, quick solutions. What can I do with somebody, unless they're very, very injured? Immediately, sometimes it's wrong fingering. Sometimes they sit too low. Sometimes the wrist has to be a little bit higher. Sometimes it's hard. They get power. They're forcing. I explain where power comes from. Immediately it becomes easy. How to put the key down, where sound is produced. Things that I should have learned at Juilliard, years ago. I was told
Yeah.
to play for my back, to play for my stomach. The stomach doesn't play and the back doesn't play. I mean, it's like it's nonsense. So I don't take everybody apart. But interestingly, very often when I'll get somebody immediately much better and they see the potential, they will, when the performance is over or sometimes later, they'll come and say, I would like to learn a little bit more from the ground up. But those people are very easy. It goes very quickly because they have a lot of the natural already. So what I have to put, and some of the prodigies who lost, who became injured, because a teacher, instead of saying not touching them, said, move your fingers more, gave them some exercises, and the technique went off.
Oh, wow.
So with people like that, with a very innate sense of playing and who played well, when I put them on the right track, they will say, that's how I used to play. Except that now they're gaining actually, the control over their lives. What knowledge is control over what you do. So it's not an accident. Like they say, sometimes it comes out and sometimes it doesn't come out. That used to be my experience. I didn't know when it was right. I didn't know when it was not right. I didn't know what the ethics were. And this gives them, so that can be fast. And then from there they can move. And there's the potential grows. The talent, so I have the different types, but I would say the smart people, and you really need to be smart for this, usually want to know a lot more. And also I train people to be teachers because what you get is what you need. But that doesn't give you enough knowledge to help somebody else, except maybe in a more superficial way. And the injuries, they're not lesser injuries. There are more and more injuries, and they are more and more serious.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So that's shocking to hear. Well, because quite honestly, as I was doing some of the research, I'm thinking injuries. Like, how do you get injured, like playing the piano? Other than for me, from an untrained eye, I'd be like, okay, I get the repetitive motion injury, stuff like that. But there was stories of people having like massive shoulder pain and back pain and hip pain, and I'm like, what? This is you're not moving the piano, you're playing it. But yeah,
that's serious. It can take the whole body. Yeah. If, for example, if you come from the world of isolation, you're full of tension. If you curl your fingers, you're pulling on muscles that tighten, and then you're given exercises to move the fingers. When they're already in a position that is hard to do, we're in the world of stretching, everything, the fingers, you don't have to be smart. When you do that, immediately there's tension. And then the fingers have to go down and play fast. If you sit too low, or if you drop your wrist low, the shoulders go up.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't help but make the connection between what I was hearing and watching and to just some fundamental ergonomics of even how we sit at our desks and work. Yeah.
Well, those symptoms come from clicking on the computer. I have a website for computer users because it's the fundamental things of no isolation, no breaks in the alignment, the right height, the right sitting. And then on top of that is, how do we move in an aligned way? Just being aligned doesn't give you the information. It's like the first step. So you have people, I mean, if you read, years ago, I read the New York Times, the science section. Once a week, there's a science section. There's a woman who writes every week. And occasionally there's an article about, computer. And she would say, something so innocuous, how could it cause, she's describing a young man, 28, who couldn't drive anymore, couldn't do anything on the computer. Well, clearly it's not so simple. But the answers, actually, I can usually, to work with somebody at the computer, or they can't hold the iPhone, or they can't, when they're clicking and they're curling the thumb and all of that, and they have the problems with the thumb and the other fingers, that takes me maybe 15 or 20 minutes to fix and maybe see the person again, because that's all you need is several movements, several positions, several situations. and you show it. To play the piano is much more complicated. On top of that, you have to learn many other things because you can music. But the foundation, why people get injured, it could be from one movement, one twisted movement of the hand going like this or like that. People holding, the knife in the kitchen. Chefs, I mean, most professions have injuries. They can be cured in a few minutes. The
Yeah.
correct knowledge.
Yeah. That was amazing to me.
Yeah.
So I remember watching a teaching, a lecture that you were doing, and you made this comment, and I wrote it down and put it in our list to talk about today. You said, practice doesn't make perfect. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by practice doesn't make perfect? Because we hear that all the time.
No, what we really hear, it started with the saying, when somebody gets into a cab in New York and say, take me, what would it take to take me to Carnegie Hall? How do I get to Carnegie Hall? Cab driver says, practice, practice, practice.
Right. Yeah.
Who's going to answer it? But so we have the whole saying in our field that that practice makes perfect. So the question is, what are we practicing? In other words, if you're practicing, when they talk about overuse syndrome, Talman called it misuse. So they think you get injured from overuse, but the repetitive stress injuries, but it's overusing the wrong movement, doing them again and again and again and again and again. So what I say, well, I put together years ago a lecture, well, what happens when practice doesn't make perfect? And the thing is that when we teach, what we practice, actually the solutions to problems. You don't have to do things a million times. And when the solutions are right and they work in, you don't forget them. It's a time saver. You don't have to do them again and again and again. It's like the body has its own intelligence. The hands actually become intelligent. You have installed a whole world of what is needed. So the question is, what are we practicing? When things feel good, they're there. They're in your hands. So you want to make it better. You work on the music. You take new pieces. So there are things to work on. It's not that there isn't, but most people, when they practice, the overuse syndrome, they're practicing motions that eventually lead to injuries. If your fingers are all isolated and you do it hours a day, if they're curled and so full of tension, and you're practicing. So that's what I'm talking about. We have to practice the solutions. What this work really does, it kind of magnifies. What Tamon was able to do is to penetrate, to ask the right questions, and to penetrate underneath and to begin. She had a certain intuition what to do, but she didn't know it was going to lead to what. She didn't sit down one day and said, I'm going to figure out piano technique. She just wanted to know, why am I tense? She was gifted. She practiced a lot. And certain passages never fell in. She practiced and practiced and practiced, and you still couldn't count on it. So instead of accepting it as, well, that's how things are, she said, there must be a better way. And if prodigies could do it, if I could only figure out what is it that they do that they don't know that they do, if I could figure it out, then everybody can have a technique. So that's when I talk about practice is, so what we practice actually is what ends up to be the final solution, magnified at the beginning, a little bit bigger, and taking apart for different situations and put together. It's like wiring the different movements into a system that creates a computer. It's a wired system. And so the practicing begins to be really what the final result is. At the beginning, it's, you take elements, you separate them. She was able to separate, how do we move across? How do we move into the black key area and out? Because if we don't move in and out, we end up twisting.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I'm like, that's just so... when the person did it, I'm like, yeah, okay, like no duh, right? I mean, yeah, you move your hand 2 inches and yeah, it makes sense. But I'm thinking like, so then why are all these people doing it wrong? Or why are they doing it this way?
Because we're just told to move fingers. You see, it's not based that we actually move. Nobody thinks that this is a system of movement because all you see are fingers moving. So all the methodologies have been based, develop the fingers, develop the fingers, develop the fingers. And everything that it's connected to was not, was not taken into consideration, except that some people figured out that this probably was not the full story, and they started relaxing a lot of weight, and that caused tremendous amount of weight from the shoulder, from the upper arm. So there was a release. There's a release for a short time, a little bit of relaxation, and it's still taught. Relax, 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 and then that caused problems. And based also, when you see someone play, you see that other parts are moving. But if you initiate from those parts, like the upper arm, which is moved by a slow muscle, you get tired. So the question is, so what are the actual initiators here? And because the body is connected, what is following it rather than initiating it? So it turns out it's the finger, it's the hand, the forearm can do sideways motions, the in and out motions, the shaping motions. And the upper arm follows. But it does, so it moves in very small amounts. It's like when I go to pick up something, I don't go for my shoulder. I don't go for my upper arm. I'll get tired right away. We don't know that we do it, but we move really from the finger, we move from the hand, from the forearm, and we move as a unit. Because if we did in life what we do at the piano, we couldn't function. If we just moved with curved fingers, and the dropper is, I used to say in desperation, try to hold on a bottle of water. With the wrists like that, with the fingers like this, try to do it. And we told to do that at the piano.
Yeah. No, yeah. That's just, when you say it like this, it just makes it so I'm just like, yeah, that's so clear.
I know it's clear. And yet it's not clear. We sit in a field that is it's very mysterious. The whole thing is very mysterious. And there's fear of losing the mystery. And when you realize how something works, it doesn't lose the mystery. It's like babies. You have 4 kids. Isn't it still a miracle to see how they're conceived, but how does it all happen? And then they come out, and then the little thing, and then they grow and they grow and they change it. I mean, this is a miracle. We know how it happens. But what's the source of all of this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know what happens biologically. I can even tell you what happens chemically and all that other stuff. But why does my son feel this way as opposed to my daughter who feels this way? They're both firstborn in their gender. One's firstborn in the family. I can break all that down, but one's extremely extroverted, one's extremely introverted, and yet they'll have very similar value systems, but they live in them completely differently. So I get it. That's so cool. Edna, this has been just a joy and a pleasure to spend this time with you. I wonder if you could answer just a couple more questions for me. What can we learn from someone who's a prodigy? And I ask that question because I see people who are really good at what they do. And I know it's not all born, like there's no gene that comes with that. I know that there's some talent that's inherited from mom and dad to a degree, but there has to be something else there. But what can we learn from someone who's a prodigy?
Well, a prodigy is really a miracle, I have to say. I mean, it is, whether you're religious or not, it is a God-given gift. We don't know how it happens. But what we can learn from it, instead of just saying, well, this is, nobody else can do it. And that's what I think Dorothy took from it, is that the body is capable of doing like amazing things. And if we only understand what these things are, we can have it for ourselves. We may not be like that prodigies, because today 3-4-year-olds are playing Chopin etudes. It's like, I think they burn out by age 6 or 7, but but they put them in the tiny little things. So I think that this is really what it is to me. I mean, the fact that they're prodigies to me is kind of miraculous. Maybe they lived another life. I don't know, because they're kind of old souls. They have the kids who at a very young age have tremendous amount of information. They understand. At age 12, they finished college. I mean, how does that happen? I have no explanation for that. The things that we just don't know, that are mysterious, how it happens. And to have that kind of gift, I think the takeaway is that it can be lost. Now, does it mean that the person lost their talent? No. They lost they don't know what they did. And there's no information in their hands to get off whatever was wrong and to get right back on the horse. So I don't know if there is, I think that it's possible. The body is capable for all of those things, but we have to take us ourselves where we are, get the right information, and be the best that we can be, which is a lot more than we ever thought we were able to do. Really, when you give this to people, I mean, this is really one of the greatest satisfactions. People see themselves in a totally different light. That and it does expand the brain. I know that it makes you more intelligent, this learning. So I don't know. I'm looking at my notes. It also, I'll tell you what else it's maybe probably not what you expected to hear. But the fact that someone can, at a very young age, do such developed skills without years of practicing, without all the exercises that we're given, means that there is something very natural, that the body is capable of doing, and that the years of practicing and not getting results, we're practicing the same things and very often don't get better. Sometimes we improve. I practice and I improved some, but I know that I hit a wall. And today, and for many years, I know also that it wouldn't have gotten much better because of this and this and that. And I was thinking the other day that isn't it the definition of madness to keep doing the same thing and expecting results when you're not? It is madness. So I think that the lesson is more that if you put in the right things, that it can be there, that those particular individuals just had that innate, and they don't get better. And I very often we have, in summer institutes when we've had people, and some of them were incredible pianists, and I could see the hands, and I knew that person is going to deteriorate. They're forcing through, and they're incredible. It's great, huge talent. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it does. It does. And it's encouraging to know that, that there are things that we may never be a prodigy to a certain degree, but there are always things that we can do to keep growing, to keep improving. And it's important to know that, things that we do now have an effect on the future. But also if we don't practice them, and willing, what I think I'm hearing is, if we don't practice them in a way that we're willing to look at things a little differently from a different perspective, you're just going to keep repeating the same mistake over and over and over again. And that's when you hit that wall. And so what I pull away from our conversation about all of that is there's a lot to learn about how people learn. And even though somebody has a tremendous amount of skill and a tremendous amount of talent, you can never forget about the fundamentals, the for a lack of a better term, the ergonomics of what we're doing, and how we can find the key to unlock that door to get that potential and that talent to grow, even beyond the shadow of a doubt. When somebody walks into your classroom or your office and says, "I don't know if I can do it anymore."
Right. And you have to we cannot figure it out ourselves. It took several hundred years because those injuries were written about in slightly different way, but it's the same 300 years ago.
Oh, really?
A doctor, Ramazzini, an Italian doctor, who talked about drummer of palsy, if I remember, he realized that there was a relationship between movement and injury. He saw people in the field who were moving a certain way and had pain. 19th century. I mean, there's a lot written. It's not a new problem. And they did the surgeries, early 20th century. Then people couldn't, play anymore. It's the same problems. It's just that with the new technology, we thought that things could improve. But basically, we still treat symptoms and don't get to the root causes. What this work does is give information. We need the sources of information, whatever the field is, that explain what are the root causes, how things work, and we can tell it's right or wrong by the way it feels in the body. When something makes you better and better and better, I've talked to adults and said, now you're a prodigy. Because the facility grew and the understanding grew. It takes a while because it's like a whole other language. Sometimes similar words that we use in everyday, like weight and like gravity and like this and like that, but it's explained very differently in terms of how the mechanism for playing works. So people become prodigy in the sense that they become so good and the learning becomes so easy, as you develop. But yeah.
That's great. Edna, thanks again for taking the time to be with me tonight. I really appreciate you being here, and it's amazing the work that you do. And we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the method that you teach, but I'll make sure that I include some links for people to go to YouTube and watch some of the tutorials and watch some of your lectures. There is a lot of crossover from what you do in the musical world to what I do in trades education and what some of my other colleagues do in the educational world. There's a lot that we can learn from this conversation that will apply. And I thank you again for taking the time. It's been an honor to spend it with you.
My pleasure. It was really, really a pleasure. And if there's anything you ever want to ask me, write to me. And if there's anything I can learn from what you do, I'll be interested.
Okay. Thank you.